Welcome to American Transcendentalism. Today I'm going to give you a very brief explanation of American Transcendentalism, and we'll talk a little bit about Emerson's nature and the American scholar. First, let's talk about what Transcendentalism is. It's a philosophic term that was first used by Immanuel Kant, who was responding to John Locke. Here's John Locke. He says, "No man's knowledge here can go beyond his experience." This is to a great extent what we've talked about in the Romanticism videos that you've already watched. In this case, what he means, of course, is that what we know is what we can sense, what we know through our five senses or empirical knowledge. Already we know that the Romantics do not agree with that. Kant argues instead that all our knowledge begins with experience. There is indeed no doubt. But although our knowledge originates with experience, it does not all arise out of experience. There is, for Kant, something more we can know than our senses tell us. So now we move ahead to Emerson. Kant speaks of a transcendent knowledge, and Emerson follows in that tradition. He's not following exactly in Kant's footsteps, so what we know of Transcendentalism through Emerson, the American Transcendentalist, comes through Coleridge, Wordsworth, and Goethe. So we know this from their thought. They kind of process Kant, and then Emerson is influenced by Coleridge, Wordsworth, and Goethe. They are all seeking a truth that is higher than the physical. With Emerson, you want to think about, as you read, that the word reason is not logical. You want to keep that in mind because you will run across the word reason and you're going to say, well, he seems rational, logical, materialist, all of that. But no, for Emerson, reason is not logical. Instead, reason in Emerson is something of an intuition of the mind. It's something like instinct, some kind of spiritual knowledge. It promises access to religious, poetic, or symbolic truth. It is sort of like a sixth sense, although it's not one of the senses. It's not logic. It is something of the soul that is connected to a truth that is higher than experiential or material truth, not empirical knowledge. Now, as you are reading Emerson, you might find a few terms helpful. The sublime, the first one here, the sublime, you want to go back and watch the video from Module 3 if you need to on the sublime. That might help you, or you may be familiar with it enough now. Another term that might help is analogy. He uses analogies in his writing and talks about analogy. Analogy is a comparison of two things that highlights the similarities of their natures. In the case of Emerson, he highlights how one thing can represent another or be a sign or symbol of another, such as when he says words are signs of natural facts. So you just kind of want to know that he's working with that one thing can always represent another thing. Also, the oversoul. This is not an easy thing to understand. Don't worry if you don't understand it as you're reading at this point. It's the life force of the universe, of which all beings are a part, for Emerson. All people, nature, everything in the universe are part of it and participate in it. People participate in the oversoul. They participate in divinity. And throughout nature, he's kind of urging us to connect with the oversoul, to connect with nature, or at least be aware of your participation in God and divinity and that you are part of that. It's kind of vague, but it's sort of like becoming one with the all. So it's that force, life force of the universe, and that we participate in it. If it doesn't completely make sense, don't worry, because Emerson is not putting together a systematic theology or a systematic philosophy. He's not always consistent, But he does have, with the Transcendentalists, this idea that you are participating in divinity and you can perfect yourself as you go along. Also, the term Neoplatonic you may run across. Neoplatonic means that if Emerson is Neoplatonic in that he finds reality in something transcendent, not merely in the world of material things and logic. So it's just that finding a truth that's higher than the material. The real is the ideal. So it's the thing that you can imagine that is more perfect. These are just some terms that you might run across in your reading or reading about Emerson. Now, we want to turn to nature, as in the work that you're reading. If you don't, again, follow nature clearly and logically, don't worry again. It's not necessarily systematic. But we do want to think about what he's pointing at in nature and get a general feel for the direction he's going in. And here it is. He says, I am become a transparent eyeball. I am nothing. I see all. This is kind of the beginning of nature. At the end of nature, he seems to go in a slightly different direction. But at the beginning of nature, he seems to be encouraging us to become one with the spirit of nature. It's not real clear to some how the eyeball can see all while it is nothing. Then I guess that's why it's transcendent, but you have the little transparent eyeball down there at the bottom, and then you're hopefully just kind of becoming one with nature. It's a very romantic vision, and you just want to kind of go with the flow with Emerson on this. What is nature to Emerson? And this is a big question. Is it a metaphor of the human mind? Is it a source of delight and beauty and truth? He seems to say this in the early chapters of nature. In chapter 6, though, he says that, in chapter 6 of nature, which is called idealism, he says, the poet conforms things to his thoughts. So there is this creative, manipulative, constructive effort on the part of the poet. He also says in chapter 5, which is called Discipline, and you've got this quote on your screen here, nature is thoroughly mediate. It is made to serve. It receives the dominion of man as meekly as the ass on which the Savior rode. So there is this one part of nature where it sounds like he is worshiping it, or he wishes to become part of it because it participates in the divine, and that is true. He does say that. But at the other side, he says that nature is something that we can shape according to our will. So it is made to serve the will of man. You might also look at chapter 4 on language, where he talks about words being signs of natural facts. This is right at the very beginning of chapter 4, language. Words are signs of natural facts. Then particular natural facts are symbols of particular spiritual facts. And then nature is the symbol of spirit. So nature is the symbol of spirit, and apparently the will or the spirit can impose itself. Not that the will and the spirit are the same, but perhaps the human will can impose itself on nature and shape it as it sees fit. So are we to impose and shape, or are we to follow and participate in? It's not clear. He does seem to say, though, that nature is here to conform to man's will in at least one part. However, it is up to you to decide. You may reflect and argue on either side in your posts and your reflections. In nature, he does seem to admire nature. He also seems to see it as something of a raw material. In the American Scholar, though, very much more forthright work, he says we must be independent. And on that, I want to encourage you, as you write your posts and your reflections, to be independent and take your own opinion of Emerson and argue it. He says that each scholar, each one of us, as we study literature, as we study philosophy, have to remember that we are just like Aristotle or Plato or the great thinkers of the past, because Aristotle and Plato at one time were just college students sitting in a library studying and thinking their own thoughts. Emerson encourages us also to be independent and to think for ourselves and to be man thinking or we might argue woman thinking, and not be the bookworm.